Then her stunning mother appeared and changed his fate after Cowboy rescued an Apache child. The sun hung like a burning coal in the white Arizona sky, beating down on the endless stretch of desert that seemed to go on forever. James Sullivan wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dusty sleeve and squinted across the rocky landscape. He had been riding since dawn, checking the fence lines on the far edges of his small cattle ranch. It was 1887, and life out here in the Arizona Territory was hard and lonely, but it was the only life James knew. He was 32 years old, tall and lean from years of physical labor, with sun-darkened skin and hands rough as leather. His ranch wasn't much to look at, just a simple wooden house, a barn that needed repairs, and about 50 head of cattle that he struggled to keep fed during the dry seasons. But it was his, earned through backbreaking work and saved pennies from his years as a hired hand on bigger spreads. James was heading back toward home when he saw something that made him pull his horse to a sudden stop. There, maybe 100 yards ahead, near a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees, something was moving. He reached for the rifle in his saddle holster, automatic response in this dangerous land, then paused. The movement was small, uncertain, not the confident stride of a man or the quick darting of an animal. He urged his horse forward slowly, carefully. As he got closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stumbling between the rocks. Even from a distance, he could see she was Apache. Her dark hair, her clothing, and she was alone, which made no sense at all. Apache children didn't wander the desert by themselves. James dismounted and approached on foot, moving slowly so he wouldn't frighten her. The girl turned toward him, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. Her dark eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. There was dried blood on her leg where her buckskin dress had torn, revealing a nasty cut that looked infected. "Easy now," James said softly, holding his hands out to show he meant no harm. "Easy there, little one." The girl stared at him, swaying on her feet. She tried to back away but stumbled. James caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and he could feel her small body trembling. Her skin was burning hot to the touch, fever along with everything else. This presented James with a terrible problem, and he knew it. The relationship between white settlers and Apache people in this part of the territory was poisonous with hatred and violence. There had been raids, murders, and revenge killings on both sides for years. Just last month, a neighboring ranch had been attacked, and 3 men had died. Many of James's fellow ranchers would have left this child to die without a second thought, or worse. Some might have harmed her out of pure spite and fear. But James Sullivan had been raised by a mother who taught him that every human life had value, no matter what. She had been a deeply religious woman who read the Bible every night and believed that kindness was the highest virtue. She had died 5 years ago, but her voice was still clear in his mind. He could almost hear her now. "James, you do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He looked down at the small, frightened face of the child in his arms and made his decision. He couldn't leave her here to die. Whatever consequences came from helping her, he would face them. James lifted the girl onto his horse and climbed up behind her, holding her steady with one arm while he guided the horse with the other. She didn't fight him. She was too weak, too far gone. Her head lolled against his chest as they rode, and he could hear her breathing, shallow and rapid. The ride back to his ranch took nearly an hour. By the time they arrived, the girl had fallen unconscious. James carried her inside his simple house and laid her on his own bed. He had never been married, lived alone, and the house showed it. Sparse furniture, dishes piled in the wash basin, dust on every surface. But the bed was clean enough, and that was what mattered now. He fetched water from the well and brought it inside in a tin cup. He lifted the girl's head gently and dribbled small amounts of water between her cracked lips. At first she didn't respond, but then her throat moved and she swallowed. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, confused and afraid, before closing again. Next, James examined the cut on her leg. It was worse than he had thought. Deep and clearly infected, with angry red skin around the edges. He had some medical supplies left over from the last time he had injured himself working with barbed wire. He boiled water on his stove, cleaned the wound as carefully as he could, applied some carbolic acid that made the girl whimper even in her unconscious state, and wrapped it with clean cloth. He spent the rest of that day caring for her. He gave her more water, a few spoonfuls at a time. He placed damp cloths on her forehead to help with the fever. He watched her breathing, terrified that she might die right there in his house despite his efforts. As evening came and the brutal heat of the day finally began to ease, the girl's eyes opened. She looked around frantically, clearly terrified. James was sitting in a chair near the bed, and he held up his hands again in that same peaceful gesture. "You're safe," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. You understand? Safe?" The girl stared at him for a long moment. Then her eyes moved around the room, taking in the strange surroundings, the white man's house, all of it so different from what she knew. James slowly reached for the cup of water and held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it with both small hands and drank deeply. "Slow," James said, gently pulling the cup back. "Too much too fast will make you sick. Slow and steady." Over the next hour, using simple gestures and a few words, they began to communicate. James pointed to himself and said, "James." The girl watched him carefully, then pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Kiona. He repeated it, and she nodded. James heated up some beans and cornbread. Simple food, but it was what he had. Kiona ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as if she expected him to turn dangerous at any moment. But gradually, as she realized he truly meant no harm, some of the fear left her face. That night, James gave Kiona the bed and made himself a pallet on the floor. He lay awake for hours, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He knew he needed to return her to her people, but how? He had no idea where the Apache were camped, and riding around looking for them was a good way to get killed. The Apache were being hunted by the U.S. Army and were hiding in the most remote, dangerous parts of the territory. The next morning, Kiona's fever had broken. Her leg was still injured, but the infection seemed to be responding to the treatment. James gave her more food and water, and they sat together on his porch, looking out at the desert. He tried to ask her how she had become lost, using gestures and drawings in the dirt, but she either didn't understand or couldn't explain. On the second day, a massive dust storm rolled in from the west. James could see it coming from miles away, a huge brown wall that swallowed the sky. He quickly secured everything that could blow away, brought his horses into the barn, and took Kiona inside the house. They sat together while the wind howled and sand pelted the walls like 1,000 tiny fists. The storm lasted all day and into the night, making it impossible to go anywhere or do anything. During those long hours trapped inside, something unexpected happened. Despite having no common language, despite coming from completely different worlds, James and Kiona began to connect. He showed her how to play a simple card game, and her face lit up with delight when she won. She hummed songs from her people, beautiful and haunting melodies that gave James chills. He carved a small horse from a piece of wood he had been saving, and her eyes went wide with wonder when he gave it to her. By the time the storm finally cleared on the third morning, James realized that he had grown attached to this small, brave child, and she seemed to trust him now, following him around the ranch as he did his morning chores, her small hands sometimes reaching out to hold on to his shirt tail. But that morning brought something else, something that would change everything. James stepped out of his house just after dawn and froze. There, arranged in a semicircle around his property, were 6 Apache warriors on horseback. Every single one of them had a rifle pointed directly at him. His heart nearly stopped in his chest, and slowly, very slowly, he raised his hands above his head. James stood completely still, his hands raised high above his head, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it pounding in his ears. The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, but James barely noticed the beauty. His entire focus was on the 6 Apache warriors surrounding his ranch, their rifles steady and aimed directly at his chest. He had faced danger before in his life, angry bulls, rattlesnakes, even a few bar fights in his younger days, but nothing like this. These were skilled fighters, men who had survived years of conflict and knew exactly how to kill quickly and efficiently. James was under no illusion about his chances if they decided he was an enemy. One wrong move, one word spoken in the wrong tone, and he would be dead before he hit the ground. The warriors sat motionless on their horses, their faces hard and unreadable. They wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and pieces taken from the white man's world: cotton shirts, leather vests, cloth headbands. Their weapons were a similar mix of traditional and modern. James could see knives, bows, and those deadly rifles that had probably been taken from soldiers or traders. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. James kept his hands up and tried to keep his breathing steady. He wanted desperately to say something, to explain, but he had no idea if any of them spoke English, and he didn't want to startle them into shooting. Then the warriors parted, making a path, and she rode through. James had lived his entire life in the American West, and had seen many women: ranchers' wives, saloon girls, shop owners in town, travelers passing through. But he had never seen anyone quite like the woman who now sat on horseback before him. She was Apache, probably in her late 20s, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that seemed to look straight through him and see everything he was thinking and feeling. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that struck him. It was the way she carried herself. There was an authority in her posture, a quiet strength that reminded James of the way his father had carried himself, like someone who had earned respect through courage and wisdom, not through bullying or threats. The warriors deferred to her instantly, watching her for signals, waiting for her commands. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, moccasins that came up to her knees, silver jewelry that caught the morning light. But what captured James's attention most were her eyes. They were filled with worry, fear, anger, and fierce determination, all mixed together. This was a woman on a mission, and James suddenly understood what that mission was. She was looking for her child. As if in answer to his realization, James heard a sound behind him. He didn't dare turn around with all those rifles pointed at him, but he knew what had happened. Kiona had heard the voices and come to the door. He heard her small gasp, and then she cried out a single word in Apache, a word that needed no translation because the emotion in it was universal. "Mother!" Kiona rushed past James, her injured leg apparently forgotten in her excitement and relief. The woman on horseback's entire face transformed. All that hardness melted away, replaced by pure maternal love and desperate relief. She dismounted in one fluid motion and dropped to her knees just in time to catch Kiona as the little girl threw herself into her mother's arms. James watched as the woman, Kiona's mother, held her daughter tightly, rocking her back and forth, touching her face, her hair, her arms, as if to confirm that she was real and whole. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice breaking with emotion, and Kiona answered in the same language, words tumbling over each other. The little girl pointed back at James several times as she spoke. The warriors had lowered their rifles slightly, but they hadn't put them away. They were still watching James with suspicion and hostility. He understood why. For all they knew, he was the one who had taken Kiona in the first place. White men had done terrible things to Apache families. Children had been stolen, women had been attacked, men had been murdered. The Apache had every reason to assume the worst. After several long minutes of holding her daughter, the woman gently pulled back and began examining Kiona carefully. She lifted the hem of the little girl's dress to look at the injured leg, and James saw her entire body stiffen when she saw the bandage. Her eyes snapped up to look at him, and for a moment James thought this was the end. He had touched her child. He had cut away cloth to reach the wound. In her culture, that might be seen as a terrible violation. But then Kiona spoke again, urgently, tugging at her mother's sleeve and pointing at James. The little girl pantomimed drinking water, eating food, sleeping. She pointed to the bandage and then to James, and even made a gesture that James recognized. It was the same gentle, careful movement he had used when cleaning her wound. The woman studied James for a long moment, her eyes moving over his face as if reading a book written there. Then she stood, lifting Kiona onto her hip, despite the child's size, and walked slowly toward him. The warriors tensed, their rifles coming back up slightly, ready to protect her if needed. She stopped about 6 feet away from James. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. This was a mother who had been searching desperately for her lost child, probably without rest, probably driven half-mad with worry. One of the warriors rode forward. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and scars that told stories of many battles. He spoke to the woman in Apache, his tone respectful, and she responded. Then he turned to James and spoke in heavily accented but understandable English. "She is Ayana," the warrior said, gesturing to the woman. "Daughter of Chief Natan. The child is Kiona, her daughter. Ayana asks what happened. How did you find the child?" James slowly lowered his hands, moving carefully so no one would think he was reaching for a weapon. He took a deep breath and began to explain. He told them about finding Kiona in the desert, about how she had been alone and injured and dying of thirst. He described how he had brought her to his ranch, given her water and food, and treated her wound. He explained about the dust storm that had prevented him from trying to return her sooner. The older warrior translated everything James said. As he spoke, James watched Ayana's face. Her expression was difficult to read, but something seemed to shift there. The hardness didn't disappear entirely, but it softened slightly. She asked a question in Apache, and the warrior translated. "Why did you help her? Your people and our people are enemies. You could have left her to die. Many of your people would have done this. Some would have done worse. It was a fair question, and James thought carefully about his answer. My mother taught me that every life has value," he said simply. "She taught me to help people who need help regardless of who they are. I couldn't leave a child to die in the desert. I just couldn't. The warrior translated, and Ayanna listened carefully. She asked another question, and the translation came, "Did you harm her in any way?" "No, ma'am," James said firmly, looking directly into Ayanna's eyes. "I swear to you, I did not. I only tried to help her. You can see that she's been fed and cared for. You can see that her wound has been treated. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm telling you the truth." Kiona spoke up then, tugging at her mother's arm and speaking rapidly. James couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the tone. She was defending him, telling her mother that he had been kind. The little girl even held up the small wooden horse he had carved for her, showing it to her mother with obvious pride and affection. Ayanna looked down at her daughter, then back at James. She studied him for another long moment, and James had the strangest feeling that she was seeing past his sun-weathered face and dusty clothes, seeing something deeper. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something in her. She spoke to the older warrior, who nodded and spoke to the others. Slowly, with obvious reluctance, the warriors lowered their rifles. The tension that had been crackling in the air eased slightly, though it didn't disappear entirely. Ayanna stepped closer to James. She shifted Kiona to one hip and reached into a leather pouch hanging from her belt. She pulled out something small and held it out to him. It was a bracelet, made of tiny beads in beautiful patterns of blue, white, and black. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every bead perfectly placed. The older warrior spoke again. "Ayanna thanks you for saving her daughter's life. This bracelet is a gift, a token of gratitude and respect. In our culture, such a gift creates a bond. It means that she sees you as someone worthy of honor." James reached out carefully and took the bracelet. It was so delicate in his rough, calloused hands that he was almost afraid to hold it. "Thank you," he said, looking at Ayanna. "I'm honored." "Truly," Ayanna spoke again, and the warrior translated. "She says that her people have been tracking Kiona since she wandered from their camp 3 days ago. They have searched without rest. She says that you have given her back the most precious thing in her life, and she will not forget this." James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. There was something happening here, something he didn't fully understand. When Ayanna's eyes met his, he felt a jolt of connection that was completely unexpected. It was as if in that moment they truly saw each other, not as white man and Apache, not as enemies from different worlds, but simply as two human beings who had been brought together by circumstance and a shared care for a small child. The moment stretched between them, lasting perhaps only a few seconds, but then Ayanna stepped back, breaking the connection. She spoke to the older warrior, who began gathering the other men. It was clear they were preparing to leave. Kiona squirmed in her mother's arms and reached toward James. She said something in Apache, her voice pleading. Ayanna looked surprised but set her daughter down. Kiona ran to James and wrapped her small arms around his leg in a tight hug. Then she looked up at him with those big dark eyes and said in careful halting English, "Thank you." He knelt down so he was at her level and gently touched the top of her head. "You're welcome, little one. You take care of yourself, you hear? And listen to your mother." Kiona smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and then ran back to Ayanna, who lifted her onto the horse. The warriors were already mounted and ready to go. The older warrior gave James a nod that might have been respectful, and then they began to ride away. James stood in front of his ranch house, watching them go. But just before they disappeared into the desert landscape, Ayanna looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes found his across the distance, and for just a moment she held his gaze. Then she turned away and they were gone, swallowed up by the vast expanse of rock and sand and sky. James looked down at the bracelet in his hand, running his thumb over the intricate beadwork. He had the strangest feeling that this wasn't the end of the story, that somehow, impossibly, he would see Ayanna again. And even stranger, he realized that he wanted to. He wanted to see those intelligent eyes, that quiet strength, that fierce love she had for her daughter. He shook his head at his own foolishness and went back inside his house, which suddenly felt emptier and lonelier than it ever had before. The days after Ayanna and Kiona left felt strange and empty to James. He went back to his regular routine, feeding the cattle, mending fences, hauling water from the well, but everything felt different somehow. The ranch seemed quieter than usual, and he found himself thinking about that brief encounter far more often than he should have. He kept the beaded bracelet in his pocket, taking it out sometimes in the evening to look at it by lamplight. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Tiny bead had been placed with such care and precision that the geometric patterns seemed to flow like water. He wondered how many hours Ayanna had spent creating it, her fingers moving with practiced skill. Had she made it for herself, or had she always intended it as a gift for someone? 3 weeks passed. James threw himself into his work, trying to push the memory of those intense dark eyes out of his mind. He told himself he was being ridiculous. She was Apache. He was a white rancher. Their worlds didn't mix. Couldn't mix, especially not in these dangerous times. The newspapers from town were full of stories about conflicts, raids, and the Army's efforts to force all Apache people onto reservations. It was a violent, terrible situation with good people suffering on both sides. Then, one evening in late September, as the sun was setting and painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of purple and orange, James saw a lone figure approaching his ranch on foot. His hand went instinctively to his rifle, but something made him pause. There was something familiar about the way the person moved, graceful and purposeful despite the rough terrain. As the figure drew closer, James's heart began to beat faster. It was her, Ayanna. She was alone, walking across the desert as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Though James knew how dangerous it was for her to be here, if anyone from town saw an Apache woman near his property, there would be trouble. Bad trouble. He set down his rifle and walked out to meet her, stopping about 20 feet away. She stopped too, and for a moment they just looked at each other. In the fading light, her face was partly in shadow, but he could see her eyes clearly. There was nervousness there, but also determination. "You shouldn't be here," James said quietly. "It's not safe." Ayanna reached into a leather pouch she carried and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. She stepped forward and held it out to him. James took it carefully and unwrapped it. Inside were dried herbs, different varieties that he didn't recognize, tied in neat bundles with thin strips of leather. "Medicine," Ayanna said in heavily accented English. Thank you. For Kiona." Her English was limited but understandable, and James realized she must have been practicing. The thought touched him more than he wanted to admit. He held up the herbs. "What are these for?" Ayanna seemed to struggle for the words. She pointed to one bundle. "For hurt." She made a gesture like cutting herself. "For wounds." She pointed to another. "For head pain." She touched her temple. Then she pointed to a third bundle, but seemed unable to find the English word. Instead, she placed her hand over her stomach and made a face that clearly indicated stomach sickness. "Thank you," James said sincerely. "These will be very useful, but you really shouldn't have come all this way. If someone sees you—" "I know danger," Ayanna said quietly. "I come careful no one see." James looked around nervously. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, but still, people traveled these roads. "Come inside," he said, "just for a few minutes. Get some water at least before you head back." Ayanna hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. Then she nodded and followed him to the house. Inside, James poured water from his pitcher into a cup and handed it to her. She drank, then looked around the simple room with curiosity. Her eyes fell on the wooden horse he had carved for Kiona, which the little girl had apparently left behind. It sat on James's table where he had placed it, unable to throw it away. "Kiona missed this," Ayanna said, picking it up gently. "She talk about you. She say you were a good man." James felt his face grow warm. "How is she? Is her leg healing properly?" "Yes. Good now." "She run, play." Ayanna smiled, and the expression transformed her face completely. "She is happy child, very strong spirit." They stood in the small room, an awkward but not unpleasant silence stretching between them. James knew he should encourage her to leave, to get back to safety before it got fully dark. But he found himself wanting her to stay, wanting to talk more, to learn about her. "Your English is very good," he said. "I learn some from—" Ayanna paused, searching for words. "When I was a young girl, before everything become bad between our peoples." There was sadness in her voice when she said this, a recognition of how much had been lost. James nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for what's happened to your people." Ayanna looked at him sharply, as if trying to determine if he was sincere. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy her. "Your people suffer too," she said quietly. "Good people on both sides. Die for hate, for fear, for land, is sad. Very sad." They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation halting and sometimes difficult because of the language barrier, but meaningful nonetheless. Ayanna told him, in broken English and gestures, about Kiona's father, her husband, who had been killed 2 years earlier by soldiers during a raid. She had been raising Kiona alone since then, with the help of her father and her tribe. James told her about his own life, about his mother who had died, about the loneliness of ranching alone, about his struggles to keep his small herd alive through droughts and harsh winters. He showed her the bracelet she had given him, which he now wore on his wrist, and told her how much he treasured it. As darkness fell completely, Ayanna finally said she had to leave. "I come again?" she asked, almost shyly. To practice English? You teach me?" James knew he should say no. He knew this was dangerous and foolish and could lead to nothing but trouble for both of them. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "Yes. Yes, I'd like that." And so began the most unusual and secret friendship James had ever known. Ayanna came every week or two, always at dusk when the light was fading and she was less likely to be seen. She never stayed long, an hour at most, but those hours became the highlight of James's existence. He taught her English, and she proved to be a quick and eager student. Her vocabulary grew rapidly, and soon they could have real conversations. She taught him things, too, about Apache medicine, about reading weather signs in the desert, about tracking animals. She showed him which plants were edible and which were poisonous, knowledge that could save his life in an emergency. But more than the practical knowledge they exchanged, they shared something deeper. They talked about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Ayanna spoke about her worries for Kiana's future, about what would happen to the Apache people as they were pushed further and further into smaller areas. James talked about his dreams of expanding his ranch, maybe having a family someday, though he had begun to wonder if that would ever happen for him. As autumn turned to winter and winter slowly gave way to spring, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first, a look that lasted a moment too long, an accidental touch of hands when James gave her a cup of coffee, the way his heart jumped every time he saw her figure approaching across the desert. James tried to fight what he was feeling. He told himself it was impossible, that nothing could come of it, but emotions don't listen to logic, and despite every reasonable objection his mind could produce, his heart was falling in love with Ayanna. One evening in early March, after they had been meeting for nearly 5 months, something happened that changed everything. They were sitting on James's porch, watching the stars come out. The night was unseasonably warm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of spring flowers that bloomed briefly after winter rains. Ayanna had been quiet for a while, and James could sense something was on her mind. Finally, she spoke. "James, I must tell you something." He turned to look at her, concerned by the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" "I should not come here any more," she said softly. "It is too dangerous. Not just for me. For you, too. People talk. In town, they say things about you. They say you are friend to Apache. This make them angry." James felt his chest tighten. He had known this was coming, had known it couldn't last. But hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. "I don't care what people in town say about me," he said. "You should care," Ayanna replied. "These people, they are dangerous. They hate my people. If they think you help us, they will hurt you." "Let them try," James said stubbornly. Ayanna shook her head. "You do not understand. There are men who—" She struggled for the English words. "Men who look for reasons to hurt, to kill. Men who enjoy violence. They will use any excuse. Then we'll be more careful," James said. "You can come later, when it's fully dark. I'll make sure no one sees James." Ayanna reached out and placed her hand on his arm, stopping his words. It was the first time she had touched him so deliberately, and the contact sent electricity through his entire body. "That is not the only reason I should not come." He looked into her eyes and saw his own feelings reflected there, a mixture of longing and sadness, and something that looked like fear. "What's the other reason?" he asked, though he thought he knew. "Because," Ayanna said quietly, "my feelings for you, they are not proper. You are white man. I am Apache. Our peoples are enemies. My father, he would be very angry if he knew I come here. I would pick people would not understand. And your people—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. James covered her hand with his own. "I know it's impossible," he said. "I've told myself that 100 times. I've tried not to feel what I feel. But, Ayanna, He took a deep breath. "I care about you. More than I should. More than is wise or safe or reasonable." Tears glistened in Ayanna's eyes. "I care for you too," she whispered. "That is why I must stop coming, before this becomes something that brings harm to us both." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, both knowing she was right, but neither wanting to let go. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and sorrows. Finally, Ayanna stood. "I should go now." James stood too. "Will I see you again?" She looked at him with such sadness that it broke his heart. I do not know. Maybe it is better if you do not. She started to walk away, but James couldn't let her go like this. Ayana, wait. She turned back, and before he could think about what he was doing, before doubt or fear or common sense could stop him, James closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. I know this is impossible. I know all the reasons why it can't work. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. It's the most real thing in my life. Ayana looked up at him, and in the starlight, her face was beautiful and sad and open in a way he had never seen before. What we feel does not change what is true, she said softly. The world does not care about our feelings. Maybe not, James said, but I do. I care about your feelings. And I think you care about mine. I do, she admitted, very much. They stood there, hands clasped, the warm night air surrounding them, two people from different worlds who had found something precious and fragile and probably doomed. But in that moment, James didn't care about the future or the dangers or the impossibility of it all. All he cared about was the woman standing in front of him and the connection that hummed between them like a living thing. Ayana leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest for just a moment. James could feel her trembling. Then she pulled back, squeezed his hands once, and stepped away. I will come back, she said. One more time. To say proper goodbye. But after that, no more. It must be no more. James nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched as she disappeared into the darkness, and only when she was completely gone did he allow himself to sink down onto the porch steps, his head in his hands, wondering how something so right could be so impossible. But fate, as it turned out, had very different plans for them both. 2 weeks passed after that night on the porch, 2 weeks during which James barely slept. He went through the motions of his daily work, feeding cattle, repairing a broken wagon wheel, cleaning out the barn, but his mind was elsewhere. Every evening as the sun set, he found himself scanning the horizon, hoping to see Ayana's familiar figure approaching. But she didn't come. He began to wonder if she had changed her mind about that final goodbye. Maybe she had decided it was better to just disappear from his life completely, to make a clean break. The thought filled him with a hollow ache that surprised him with its intensity. He had known her for less than a year, yet somehow she had become essential to him in a way he couldn't fully explain. On the 15th night, James was working in his barn by lamplight, organizing tools and trying to keep his hands busy so his mind wouldn't wander. The spring nights were getting warmer, and he had left the barn door open to catch any breeze. He was so focused on his work that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across the doorway. James looked up quickly, his hand going automatically to the knife on his belt. But it was Ayana, and the relief that flooded through him was immediately replaced by concern. Something was wrong. Her face was tight with worry, and she was breathing hard as if she had been running. Ayana? What's wrong? What happened? She stepped into the barn, glancing back over her shoulder nervously. Men, she said urgently. Bad men. They come here. Tonight. Soon. James felt ice run through his veins. What men? How do you know? Ayana moved closer, speaking quickly, her English becoming more broken in her urgency. I was hunting, far from my camp. I hear voices. White men, on horses. They talk about you. They say you are a traitor? They say you help Apache. You are friend to Indian? They say they will teach you lesson. Make example. James's mind raced. He knew exactly who she was talking about. There was a group of men in the nearest town, led by a man named Thornton, who were vocal in their hatred of Apache people and anyone who showed them any kindness. Thornton was a former Confederate soldier who had come west after the war, bitter and angry, looking for someone to blame for his losses. He had gathered around him other angry, violent men who shared his views. How many men? James asked. 7, maybe 8, Ayana said. They have guns. Torches. They plan to burn your ranch. Kill you. James felt a surge of anger, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help right now. He needed to think clearly. You have to go, he said. Get far away from here. If they find you here... No, Ayana said firmly. I will not leave you, Ayana. If they catch you here, it will be worse. Much worse. They'll use it as proof that I'm helping the Apache. And they'll hurt you. I won't let that happen. Before Ayana could respond, they both heard it. The sound of horses and men's voices, still distant but getting closer. There was no time to argue. Ayana grabbed James's arm. Kiona, she said. She is outside, hiding. I could not leave her at camp. I will send her to get my people. They are not far. James's eyes widened. You brought Kiona? Ayana, she's just a child. She is Apache child, Ayanna said with fierce pride. She knows these lands. She is fast smart. She will bring help. She moved to the barn door and made a soft bird call. A moment later, Kiona appeared from the shadows. She had grown in the months since James had last seen her, and her leg had healed completely. When she saw James, she gave him a quick smile, but her face was serious. She understood the danger. Ayanna knelt and spoke to her daughter in rapid Apache, giving her instructions. Kiona nodded solemnly, then turned and disappeared into the night, running like a deer across the desert landscape. James watched her go with his heart in his throat. She was heading toward where the Apache were camped, but she would have to move quickly and quietly to avoid the approaching riders. The voices were getting closer now. James could see the glow of torches in the distance. "Get in the back of the barn," he told Ayanna. "Hide in the hayloft. Don't make a sound, no matter what happens." "I will not hide while you face them alone," Ayanna said stubbornly. "Please," James said, and there must have been something in his voice because Ayanna's expression softened. "Please. I can't think clearly if I'm worried about you. I need to know you're safe." Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. She reached up and touched his cheek briefly, a gesture so tender it made James's throat tight. Then she climbed quickly up to the hayloft and disappeared to the shadows. James took a deep breath, grabbed his rifle, and walked out to face what was coming. He positioned himself in front of his house, standing in the open where they could see him clearly. He didn't want them searching around and possibly finding Ayanna. The riders came into view, 8 men on horseback carrying torches and rifles. At their head was Thornton, a tall man with a thick beard and cold eyes that reflected the torchlight like a predator's. James recognized most of the others: ranch hands, drifters, men who spent more time drinking and causing trouble than doing honest work. Thornton pulled his horse to a stop about 30 feet from James. The other riders fanned out in a loose semicircle, blocking any easy escape. The torches cast dancing shadows that made everything look surreal and nightmarish. "Evening, Sullivan," Thornton said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Nice night for a visit, don't you think?" "State your business and move on," James said calmly, though his heart was pounding. "I've got no quarrel with you." "Oh, but we have a quarrel with you," Thornton said. He spat tobacco juice on the ground. "See, word around town is that you've been consorting with savages, helping them, maybe even hiding them. That true?" "I don't know what you're talking about," James said. "I run a cattle ranch. I keep to myself. I don't bother anyone." One of the other riders, a young man with a mean face, spoke up. "We heard different. Heard you nursed an Indian child back to health. Heard you've been seen with an Indian woman. That right?" James kept his face neutral, though inside he was screaming at himself for not being more careful. "I found a lost child dying in the desert and gave her water. Then I returned her to her people. That's all." "That's all?" Thornton laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "See, that's the problem right there. You should have left the little savage to die. That's what any decent white man would have done. Instead, you brought her into your home, cared for her like she was human." The casual cruelty in his voice made James's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. "She was a child. Just a child. What kind of man leaves a child to die? The kind of man who understands that the only good Indian is a dead Indian," Thornton said coldly. "We're at war with these animals, Sullivan. They've killed our people, raided our towns, murdered innocent folks, and you want to play nursemaid to their spawn?" "I want to live according to my conscience," James said firmly. "And my conscience says you don't let children die, regardless of who they are?" Thornton's face hardened. "Wrong answer." He gestured to his men. "Search the place. If there are any savages hiding here, we'll find them. And, Sullivan, you're going to learn what happens to traitors." 2 of the men dismounted and started toward the house. James raised his rifle. "You're not welcome on my property." "Leave now, or I'll defend what's mine." Thornton laughed again. "You're 1 man with 1 rifle. We're 8 men with 8 rifles and a whole lot of rope. You do the math, Sullivan. You can't win this." He was right, and James knew it. But he also knew he couldn't let them search his property. If they found Ayanna, they would hurt her, probably kill her, and the thought made him sick with fear. He had to buy time, had to hope that Kiona had reached her people and that help was coming. "Maybe I can't win," James said. "But I can take at least 2 of you with me before I go down. Which 2 of you want to die tonight? You?" He pointed his rifle at one of the dismounted men. "Or maybe you?" He swung it toward another. The men he pointed at looked nervous, exchanging glances. Thornton noticed, and his face twisted with anger. "You cowards? Scared of 1 man? Rush him." But before anyone could move, a new sound cut through the night, a war cry that echoed across the desert, high and fierce and terrifying. Everyone froze. Then, from the darkness beyond the torchlight, arrows began to fly. The first arrow hit the ground right in front of Thornton's horse, making the animal rear in panic. The second arrow struck one of the torches, knocking it from a rider's hand. More arrows followed, precise and deadly, forcing the men to scatter and take cover. Apache warriors emerged from the darkness like ghosts, moving with incredible speed and silence. James counted at least 15 of them, maybe more. They surrounded Thornton's group completely, cutting off any escape. Leading them was an older man that James recognized, the warrior who had translated for Ayana when she had come to retrieve Kiona. And beside him rode a man who could only be Chief Natan, Ayana's father. Chief Natan was perhaps 60 years old, with a face that showed both wisdom and the scars of many battles. He sat on his horse with absolute authority, radiating a quiet power that made even Thornton look small by comparison. One of Thornton's men panicked and fired his rifle. The bullet went wild, hitting nothing. Instantly, 3 Apache arrows struck the ground around him, so close they could have killed him but didn't. The message was clear. They could have killed all of Thornton's men already if they had wanted to. They were choosing not to. "Drop your weapons," Chief Natan said in perfect, unaccented English that surprised James. "Now." Thornton looked around wildly, seeing that they were completely surrounded and outmatched. His men were looking to him for orders, but for the first time the bully seemed uncertain. "We don't want trouble with you," Thornton said, trying to sound reasonable. "We're just here for Sullivan. He's been helping your people, betraying his own kind." "He saved my granddaughter's life," Chief Natan said calmly. "He treated her wounds, gave her food and water, and returned her safely to us when he could have left her to die or done worse. This man has honor. Can you say the same?" Thornton's face flushed red with rage and embarrassment. "He's a traitor to his race." "He is a good man," Chief Natan interrupted. "Something you clearly know nothing about. Now drop your weapons and leave this place. If you return, if you harm this man or his property, we will consider it an act of war, and I promise you that is a war you will not win." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Thornton pulled his rifle from its holster and dropped it on the ground. His men followed suit, the weapons falling with dull thuds in the dirt. "Smart choice," Chief Natan said. "Now go. And spread the word in your town. James Sullivan is under the protection of the Apache. Anyone who harms him will answer to us." Thornton and his men didn't need to be told twice. They mounted their horses, those who had dismounted scrambling back up, and rode away into the night, leaving their weapons behind. They didn't look back. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, James lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. Chief Natan dismounted and walked toward him. Up close, the Apache leader was even more impressive. Tall, dignified, with eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you," James said simply. "You saved my life. You saved my granddaughter's life," Chief Natan replied. "In my culture, such debts must be repaid." He studied James carefully. "My daughter speaks highly of you. She says you have a good heart." James felt his face grow warm. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman, and Kiona is a brave, wonderful child." "Yes, she is," Chief Natan agreed. He glanced toward the barn, and James realized that Ayana must have come down from the loft. She was standing in the doorway, with Kiona beside her. The little girl must have returned with the warriors. Chief Natan turned back to James. "We need to talk. All of us. About the future, and about choices that must be made." James nodded, his mind reeling. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. He had been saved from certain death, but now he stood at a crossroads that would determine the entire course of his future. Ayana walked toward them, and when her eyes met James's, he saw fear and hope and love all mixed together. Whatever came next, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would face it with her, no matter the cost. The Apache warriors gathered their weapons and melted back into the darkness, taking positions around James's ranch as sentries. Chief Natan gestured toward the house, and the small group, James, Ayana, Kiona, the chief, and the older warrior who served as his advisor, moved inside. James lit several lamps, and the warm glow pushed back the shadows. They sat around James's simple wooden table. Kiona stayed close to her mother, but she smiled shyly at James and showed him that she still had the wooden horse he had carved for her, now worn smooth from being carried everywhere. The sight of it made James's heart ache with affection for the brave little girl. Chief Natan spoke first, his voice measured and thoughtful. "What happened tonight will not be the end," he said. Those men will go back to their town filled with anger and shame. They will tell stories, spread lies, gather more men. They will return, if not to your ranch, then they will cause trouble elsewhere. This is the way of men like that. James nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. I know. Thornton isn't the type to forgive or forget. And now that he knows the Apache are protecting me, it'll only make him angrier. You are in danger if you stay here, Chief Natan continued, not just from Thornton, but from others who think like him. Word will spread that you are a friend of the Apache. In these times, that is a dangerous thing to be.
I'm not afraid, James said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true.
He was afraid, but not for the reasons most people would expect. He was afraid of losing what little he had built here, but more than that, he was afraid of losing the connection to Ayanna that had come to mean so much to him. Ayanna had been quiet, but now she spoke. My father speaks truth. You cannot stay here safely. But there is more. She looked at her father as if asking permission, and he nodded slightly. My people, we also cannot stay where we are. The army pushes closer every day. They want to force us onto reservation lands to make us live in ways that are not our ways. We must move north soon, to more remote places, or we must surrender. The older advisor, whose name James learned was Delche, added, We will never surrender. Too many of our people have died on reservations, starved or killed by disease or broken spirits. We choose to remain free, even if it means constant moving, constant hiding. Chief Natan leaned forward, his dark eyes intense as they fixed on James. My daughter has told me about your meetings. She has told me that there is understanding between you, perhaps more than understanding. James felt his face flush, but he met the chief's gaze steadily. Yes, sir. I won't lie to you. I have deep feelings for your daughter. I know it's complicated and difficult, and maybe even wrong in the eyes of both our peoples, but it's true. And you, daughter? Chief Natan turned to Ayanna. What are your feelings? Ayanna lifted her chin, and James saw the same fierce courage she had shown that first day when she had come looking for Kiona. I love him, father. I did not plan for this to happen. I fought against it, but my heart does not listen to my head. James is a good man, an honorable man. He has shown more kindness to me and to Kiona than many men of our own people would have shown. The silence that followed was heavy. Kiona looked between her mother and grandfather with wide eyes, clearly sensing the importance of this moment, even if she didn't fully understand all of it. Finally, Chief Natan spoke again. I am an old man now. I have seen much in my life, much joy and much sorrow. I have watched our people suffer as the white men take more and more of our lands. I have seen hatred destroy good people on both sides of this conflict. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I have also learned that the world is changing in ways we cannot stop. The old ways, the ways I grew up with, they are dying. My people face a choice, adapt or disappear completely. He stood and walked to the window looking out into the darkness. I see in you, James Sullivan, something rare. I see a man who judges people by their character, not by the color of their skin or the tribe they belong to. I see a man who risks his own safety to help a child he did not know. I see a man my daughter loves, and who loves her in return. He turned back to face them. I also see a solution to a difficult problem. James leaned forward. What do you mean? You cannot stay here, Chief Natan said. That much is clear. But you could come with us. You could leave your ranch, your old life, and travel north with the Apache. You could be with my daughter, help raise Kiona, become part of our family. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. James felt his heart racing. Leave everything, his ranch, his home, everything he had worked for? Join the Apache, knowing they were hunted, knowing they lived in constant danger? He looked at Ayanna. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and he could see hope and fear warring in her expression. She wanted him to say yes, he could see that, but she also wouldn't ask him to give up everything for her. I know what I am asking, Chief Natan continued. I am asking you to give up your world and enter ours. It will not be easy. Some of my people will not accept you at first. They will see you as an outsider, an enemy. You will have to prove yourself again and again. You will live as we live, always moving, always watching for danger, never fully at rest. But, Delche added, you will also gain much. You will have a family. You will have a purpose beyond just surviving. And you will have the woman you love by your side. James stood and walked to where Ayanna sat. He knelt beside her chair so he could look into her eyes. Is this what you want? He asked softly. Truly? Ayanna reached out and took his hand. I want you, she said simply. I want us to be together, to build a life together, but I will not ask you to sacrifice everything for me. This choice must be yours, freely made. Kiona tugged on James's sleeve. When he looked at her, she said in her careful English, Please, come with us. You can be my father. I have no father now, but I would like you. The simple, honest words from the child nearly broke James's heart. He looked around the room, at this tough little girl who had already endured so much, at the woman he had come to love more than he had thought possible, at the wise old chief who was offering him something precious and rare, at the advisor who watched with kind eyes. Then he thought about his ranch, sitting empty outside. It was just wood and land. It had no soul, no heart. It was a thing, and things could be replaced. But the people in this room, the connection he had found with them, that was irreplaceable. James realized that his decision had already been made, probably weeks ago if he was honest with himself. Maybe it had been made the moment he had decided to help a lost Apache child instead of leaving her to die in the desert. That single act of kindness had set him on this path, and now he saw where it led. Yes, he said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Yes, I'll come with you. I'll leave the ranch. I'll leave everything. I'll go north with the Apache, with you. He squeezed Ayana's hand. With my family. Ayana's tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks, but she was smiling, truly smiling, and the joy in her expression was worth any sacrifice. She pulled James close and held him tightly. Kiona wrapped her small arms around both of them, laughing with delight. Chief Natan nodded with satisfaction. It is decided, then, but we must move quickly. We leave tomorrow at sunset. Can you prepare by then? James looked around his simple house, at the few possessions he had accumulated over the years. I don't need much time. Most of what I own isn't worth taking. But there is one thing. I need to sell the ranch, the cattle, everything. I can't just abandon it. There's a man in town, Henderson, who's honest and has wanted to buy my land for years. If I can get to him before Thornton spreads too many lies, maybe I can sell quickly. Too dangerous, Delche said firmly. If you go into town now, Thornton's men might kill you before you can do business. I'll go at dawn, James said, before Thornton is awake. Henderson rises early, he'll be at his office. I'll sell cheap. Just enough to get some money for the journey. Then I'll come straight back. Chief Natan considered this. Delche will go with you, watching from a distance. At the first sign of trouble, he will signal, and you will leave immediately. Your life is worth more than any price you might get for land. They talked late into the night, making plans. James would go to town at first light. Chief Natan and most of the warriors would return to their camp to prepare for the journey north. Ayana and Kiana would stay hidden near James's ranch, along with 2 warriors as guards, waiting for his return. As the others prepared to leave, Ayana pulled James aside. They stepped out onto the porch where the stars blazed overhead in magnificent profusion. The desert night was cool and peaceful, giving no hint of the violence that had nearly occurred just hours before. Are you certain? Ayana asked quietly. Once you do this, once you sell your ranch and come with us, there is no going back. You will be Apache. Your old life will be finished. James pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I've never been more certain of anything, he said. This ranch, this life. I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. Since I met you, since Kiona came into my life, everything has changed. You've shown me what really matters. That's not land or cattle or money. It's connection. It's love. It's family. And I found all of that with you. They stood together in the starlight, holding each other, 2 people from different worlds who had found something precious that transcended all the hatred and violence around them. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, James rode into town with Delche following unseen in the rocks and brush. The streets were mostly empty, and James went straight to Henderson's office. The older man was surprised to see him so early, but became very interested when James explained he wanted to sell everything immediately. I'm offering it cheap, James said. The ranch, all the cattle, the buildings, equipment, everything. I need cash today. Henderson was a shrewd businessman, but he was also fair. He could see that James was serious and in some kind of trouble, though he didn't ask questions. They negotiated quickly, and within an hour, James walked out with enough money to start a new life tucked safely in a leather pouch. He saw no sign of Thornton or his men as he rode out of town, though he kept his rifle ready just in case. Delche appeared briefly on a ridge, giving a signal that meant the way was clear, then vanished again. By midday, James was back at his ranch. He took one last walk through the house and barn, gathering the few things he wanted to keep: his mother's Bible, a photograph of his parents, some tools, warm clothes, everything else he left behind for Henderson. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the Apache returned. There were about 40 of them in total, men, women, children, all of Chief Naton's immediate band. They traveled light, everything they owned packed onto horses or carried on their backs. James said goodbye to his ranch without ceremony. It was just a place, after all. What mattered was the people around him now: Ayanna riding beside him, Kiona sitting proudly on her own pony, Chief Natan leading the group with quiet authority. They traveled north through the desert, moving at night when it was cooler and they were harder to spot. The journey was everything Chief Natan had warned it would be: difficult, uncomfortable, sometimes frightening. They had to avoid army patrols, hide from other groups of hostile settlers, find water in a harsh land. But James also found unexpected joy in the journey. He learned the Apache language, slowly at first but with increasing fluency. He learned their ways of tracking, hunting, surviving in impossible conditions. Some of the warriors were suspicious of him at first, but he proved himself through hard work and dedication. He never complained, never asked for special treatment, never acted as if he were superior. Kiona became his shadow, following him everywhere, teaching him Apache words and laughing at his clumsy pronunciation. The bond between them grew deep and strong, and within months she was calling him father without hesitation. And Ayanna, she was his constant companion, his teacher, his love. They were married in both Apache and Christian ceremonies, a blending of their two worlds. Some of the elders grumbled about it, but Chief Natan's support silenced most criticism. James discovered that he had skills the Apache could use, because he could speak English perfectly and understood white culture. He became a bridge between the two worlds. When the inevitable day came that the tribe had to negotiate with the U.S. government about reservation terms, James was able to help secure better conditions than they might have gotten otherwise. He could read the legal documents, understand the tricks and loopholes, and advocate effectively. Over the next 2 years, as the Apache made their final journey toward the reservation lands that would become their new home, James became not just accepted, but respected. His story spread among other Apache bands. The white man who had given up everything for love, who had chosen honor over comfort, who had proven that bridges could be built between peoples if there was courage and compassion on both sides. The transition to reservation life was painful for everyone. The freedom they had known was gone, replaced by boundaries and rules imposed from outside. But James, Ayanna, and Kiona faced it together, as a family. They built a small house, started a garden, raised horses. James used his position as a bridge between cultures to advocate for the Apache people, fighting against corrupt agents, securing supplies, teaching reading and writing to children who wanted to learn. Their family grew. Ayanna gave birth to a son, then a daughter. The children grew up in both worlds, speaking both languages, learning both cultures. They became living proof that different peoples could come together, could create something new and beautiful from the combination of their traditions. Years later, sitting on the porch of their house with grandchildren playing in the yard, James would sometimes think back to that day in the desert when he had found a lost Apache child. That single decision, to help rather than hate, to choose compassion over prejudice, had changed the entire course of his life. He had given up his ranch, his old identity, everything he had known. But he had gained so much more, a purpose, a love that had sustained him through the hardest times. He had become part of a people who had taught him resilience, courage, and the true meaning of honor. Ayanna would take his hand during these quiet moments, and they would sit together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. No words were needed. They both understood the journey they had taken together, the obstacles they had overcome, and the precious life they had built from what had seemed like an impossible situation. Their story became a quiet legend, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love to transcend hatred, and a reminder that sometimes the most important choices in life require us to give up everything we think we want in order to gain what we truly need. It was a story of courage, sacrifice, and the profound truth that family is not just about blood, but about the people who choose to stand beside us through whatever comes, and who we choose to stand beside in return.